Picture this: a Roman victory parade winding through the marble streets of the Eternal City. Golden chariots gleam beneath the sun, soldiers roar in triumph, and chained captives stumble behind them. Kings, warriors, and women. Among them, the defeated wives of Rome's enemies walk barefoot, veiled in shame, knowing their fates are sealed not by death, but by something far worse. The crowd cheers, but behind the spectacle lies a darkness history tried to forget. The Roman Empire was built on conquest, vast, relentless, and glorified. From the misty shores of Britannia to the burning sands of Carthage, its legions marched with divine purpose, crushing kingdoms in the name of civilization. But what followed the victories, what happened to those left behind, was a truth Rome buried beneath marble and myth. For the wives of conquered kings and generals, capture meant a fate worse than death. They were trophies, offerings, symbols of dominance displayed before the masses. Some were paraded through the streets in chains, their beauty mocked. Others were sold, humiliated, or forced into service within imperial palaces, reminders of the price of defying Rome. These women were used not just to break men, but to display the empire's unshakable power. Their stories, scattered through whispers of historians and forgotten scrolls, reveal the darkest side of victory, when conquest did not end with battle, but began in the silence that followed it. Before we uncover the chilling truth of what really happened behind Rome's golden facade, tell me, where are you watching from? And what time is it right now? Share it in the comments below. And if you're drawn to history's forbidden stories, the ones hidden behind power and glory, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and tell us what era you want exposed next. Your curiosity keeps this channel alive. The year was 146 BC, and the once mighty city of Carthage lay in ruins. Smoke curled into the crimson sky as Roman legions marched through the streets, their armor stained with ash and blood. Behind them came the spoils, gold, slaves, and the defeated. But it wasn't the treasures or the warriors that drew the crowd's eyes. It was the women, draped in torn silks, their faces hollow from days without rest. The wives and daughters of Carthage's generals were paraded before the Roman masses. The soldiers shouted, jeered, tossed fragments of bread at them as if feeding animals. And when the triumph reached the forum, the women were separated from their children, sent to await the will of the Senate. To the people, it was victory. To those women, it was the beginning of a nightmare. For Rome, humiliation was as powerful a weapon as the sword. Defeating a man in battle was not enough. His legacy had to be erased, his bloodline shamed. The wives of Rome's enemies were turned into living messages, warnings to anyone who dared oppose the empire. Some were sold into slavery, their names stripped away, becoming anonymous possessions in Roman households. Others were taken into noble villas, where their beauty was flaunted at feasts, their sorrow treated as entertainment. It wasn't about desire, it was about domination. Rome's elite wanted to see power broken, to look into the eyes of a queen and see submission. The historian Livy wrote of one such woman, the widow of a Gallic chieftain, captured during Caesar's northern campaigns. She was known for her defiance, her refusal to bow even when shackled. The general who paraded her through Rome ordered her to attend his banquet, dressed in the jewels of her dead husband. When she refused to eat, he forced her to drink wine until she collapsed, mocking her pride as weakness. That night, she was taken away, her name never recorded again. To the Romans, she was just another reminder that resistance meant ruin. Her disappearance was deliberate. The empire erased her, body and memory alike. But the cruelty wasn't born from chaos. It was structured, institutionalized. The Romans called it damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. When a man was declared an enemy of the state, not only was he executed, But his wife and daughters were punished too. Their property seized, their names scratched from inscriptions, their existence unspoken. Rome didn't just destroy the defeated, it annihilated their legacy. To lose one's husband was tragedy. To lose one's name was oblivion. These women became ghosts, living, breathing symbols of erasure. One of the most infamous examples was Cleopatra Selene, daughter of Cleopatra Septimth and Mark Antony. After her parents' defeat and suicide, she was taken to Rome as a prize. A child, yet already marked by her lineage, she was paraded in Octavian's triumph, golden chains glinting under the sun, as the crowd laughed at the fall of Egypt's glory. But even as a captive, she carried her mother's poise, her father's defiance. Rome would later gift her to a foreign king, marrying her off to ensure her bloodline remained under imperial control. Her freedom was an illusion. Every child she bore became a Roman hostage, ensuring no spark of rebellion ever rose from her line again. That was Rome's true genius: conquest through blood, domination through lineage. But behind the grandeur of these public humiliations lay something darker, quieter. The private cruelty that took place away from marble arenas. In the villas of the patrician class, the wives of defeated enemies were kept not as wives nor as slaves, but as curiosities. Some were educated, made to entertain guests with songs of their fallen homelands, their accents exoticized, their pain exotic. Others were forced to bear children for their masters, their bodies turned into vessels of both pleasure and punishment. In Rome's eyes, such acts were not crimes, they were symbols of victory. Each birth was a reminder that Rome could plant its seed in the soil of any nation it conquered. It was domination made flesh, and yet, not all broke. Some fought in silence, turning submission into defiance. Tacitus tells of a Briton woman named Cartemandua, queen of the Brigantes, who was betrayed and captured after Rome's invasion of Britannia. Though taken to Rome in chains, she refused to show sorrow. During a public feast, when asked to sing the songs of her homeland, she sang instead a funeral dirge. Slow, mournful, haunting. The hall fell silent. One Roman senator later wrote that the sound carried the chill of the north winds through marble halls. She was never seen again. But her defiance, even in captivity, became a whispered legend, the queen who sang death to her captors. But here's the chilling part. Rome's cruelty was never random. It was ritualized, almost sacred. Triumphs, the grand processions celebrating victory, always ended the same way. The captured leaders and their families were displayed before the people, then led to execution or enslavement. Women were sometimes spared publicly, only to face degradation in private. The Senate saw this not as barbarity, but as justice, the Pax Romana, peace through terror. Every parade was a performance, a reminder that the empire's power was absolute, that mercy was a privilege only Rome could grant. Imagine the scene. The forum filled with thousands, chanting, celebrating, tossing laurel leaves into the air. The emperor sits atop his chariot, the spoils of conquest glimmering before him. Behind him, bound in golden chains, walk the wives and daughters of fallen kings. Their steps are small, their eyes lowered, not by choice, but by survival. They know that one glance, one flicker of pride, could seal their fate. And when the ceremony ends, when the crowd disperses and the echoes fade, these women are led into the shadows to disappear, their fates unrecorded. Rome preserved every victory in marble, but never the tears that followed it. And if you listen closely, beneath the roar of history, you can still hear their silence. Night fell differently over Rome. When the torches dimmed and the echo of marching feet faded, the city seemed to breathe, slow, heavy, and watchful. In the candlelight of noble villas, beneath frescoed ceilings painted with gods, something unspeakable unfolded. The captured wives of Rome's enemies, once queens and noblewomen in their own lands, now lived as shadows behind marble walls. Stripped of identity and voice, they existed at the edge of society. Trophies too dangerous to display, too valuable to destroy. And though history records Rome's triumphs in stone, the stories of these women were carved in silence. Some, like the Sabine women of early legend, were taken not for punishment but for population, abducted to fill Rome's growing need for wives. But centuries later, as the empire expanded, that ancient myth became a ritual of control. The abduction of conquered women was celebrated as divine will. The gods themselves, Romans claimed, had blessed the empire with the right to take what it desired. And when resistance came, it was met with spectacle. The amphitheaters, those magnificent arenas of blood and cheers, were not built only for gladiators. Sometimes they staged the humiliation of foreign women. Public auctions disguised as entertainment. The wealthy came to bid not on slaves, but on symbols. The daughters of kings, the widows of warriors. To own one was to possess victory itself. Yet within this cruelty was a strange contradiction. Fascination. Rome feared the foreign, yet it craved it. The women of Greece, Gaul, and the East were seen as embodiments of luxury, mystery, and danger. Their presence both tempted and threatened Roman virtue. Poets like Ovid and Propertius wrote of their allure, painting them as seductresses who bewitched men into abandoning discipline. Behind those verses lay a justification. If a foreign woman could corrupt a Roman heart, then she deserved to be subdued. The cycle fed itself. Desire turned to fear. Fear turned to domination. In the imperial courts, this dynamic grew more twisted. Take the story of Zenobia, the queen of Palmyra, proud, learned, and undefeated until Rome crushed her rebellion. When Aurelian brought her to Rome in chains, she was not killed. Instead, she was displayed in the emperor's triumph, draped in jewels so heavy she could barely stand. The crowd roared as she passed, seeing not a queen but a conquered myth. Yet even humiliated, she remained poised, her silence cutting deeper than any curse. Later, Rome claimed she lived in comfort, granted a villa and wealth. But historians suspect that comfort was gilded captivity, a life lived under watch, every breath monitored. Rome loved to claim mercy when the spectacle demanded it, but mercy in Rome was just another form of control. Others were not so fortunate. After the Jewish revolt in 70 CE, the wives and daughters of rebel leaders were sold in Roman markets by the thousands. Josephus, who chronicled the war, described the scene with grim detachment. Girls of noble birth auctioned beside loaves of bread, their names replaced by numbers. Some were taken by soldiers as prizes, others sent to brothels that catered exclusively to Roman elites. In one chilling account, a group of women, refusing to submit, set fire to their prison and perished together, choosing death over dishonor. Rome, of course, erased their names, but their act of defiance whispered through generations, a spark that even empire could not extinguish. In the shadow of this brutality stood the wives of Roman generals themselves, silent witnesses, complicit or horrified. Some pitied the captives, others saw them as status symbols, dressing them in finery, parading them before guests. But behind smiles and laughter, the power imbalance remained. A single command could turn compassion into cruelty. There were stories, whispered in corridors, of noble women who envied their husbands' trophies and ordered the beaten captives to serve as handmaids. Others, jealous of beauty, demanded mutilation. Rome called it domestic justice. We would call it horror. Perhaps the most haunting accounts came from the eastern provinces. During the conquest of Dacia, Emperor Trajan's legions captured thousands, nobles, wives, priestesses. Coins minted afterward depicted Dacian women weeping beneath the word Dacia capta. Dacia, captured. It became an emblem of Roman pride, a symbol stamped into currency that crossed the known world. But those coins told only one side of the story. Archaeologists later found burial sites filled with women bearing marks of chains, their bones warped from labor. Even in death, they bore the weight of conquest. And yet, amid this darkness, glimmers of resistance endured. Some women learned to navigate the empire's hypocrisy, to turn survival into power. The story of Julia Balbilla stands as one such ember. A descendant of royal blood taken into Roman custody, she grew up in the court of Hadrian and used her education as her weapon. When the emperor visited Egypt, she inscribed poetry on the statues of ancient gods, blending Greek eloquence with veiled defiance. Her words mocked the empire that thought it owned her voice. My ancestors were kings. Now I write in the tongue of captors. For centuries, those inscriptions lay buried until rediscovered, still echoing across time, proof that even the silenced could speak from stone. But most never found such voice. The deeper Rome's empire grew, the more invisible these women became. The Senate debated wars, emperors built monuments, poets sang of glory, but none recorded the screams that came from behind closed doors. The empire's chroniclers, all men of privilege, saw no history in suffering. They wrote of conquest, not consequence. And so, the wives of Rome's enemies faded into myth, or worse, into nothing. Only fragments remain. A name half-mentioned, a statue without inscription, a bone with foreign ornaments buried beneath Roman soil. Still, their absence speaks louder than words. Every triumph arch that celebrates victory, every mosaic of a Roman general riding home in splendor, all of it stands on the silence of the conquered. Behind each inscription of glory lies a story untold, a woman unseen. The marble walls that gleam beneath the Italian sun are not pure white. They are stained with the ghosts of those who were taken, erased, forgotten. And what makes this darkness even more haunting is Rome's belief that it was righteous. The empire convinced itself that such acts were justice, divine balance. To conquer was to civilize, to enslave was to enlighten. The philosophers rationalized it, the priests blessed it, the poets romanticized it. Even love, when it crossed borders, was rewritten as conquest. In the Roman imagination, a defeated woman's submission was not tragedy. It was destiny. And by the time her story was told, she no longer owned it. Rome did. And so, as the centuries passed and the empire fell, those nameless women remained buried in silence, their suffering absorbed into marble and myth. We remember Caesar, Augustus, and Trajan, but their victories, their monuments, their legacies, all rest upon the bones of those who had no say, no script, no escape. Their silence is Rome's darkest secret. The empire that began with blood ended in dust, but its ghosts never left. When we imagine Rome's fall, we picture crumbling statues, barbarian invasions, emperors losing control. But few imagine the echoes of the women it destroyed. As the legions withdrew and the marble palaces cracked, their forgotten cries clung to the ruins. History tells us empires die from corruption, overreach, decay. But maybe, just maybe, Rome also rotted from the weight of its own sins. Because every stolen voice, every broken life, every humiliation buried beneath triumphs left a scar too deep to heal. In the twilight of empire, Rome's cruelty turned inward. The same machinery that once enslaved the wives of its enemies began devouring its own. Noble women accused of treason were paraded before crowds just like the captives once were. Empresses like Messalina and Agrippina the Younger became cautionary tales, symbols of power gone wrong. But their deaths were no different from the foreign women Rome once displayed. Execution turned into theater, judgment masked as morality. The empire had grown addicted to spectacle. It no longer needed an external enemy. The cruelty that once conquered nations now ruled the capital itself. Yet beyond the political rot, the empire's cruelty toward the conquered wives continued in its provinces, a quieter, more invisible horror. The soldiers stationed in distant outposts brought with them the habits of conquest. To them, a woman from a conquered tribe was still a prize, a reminder of victory. There are surviving letters, fragments of personal diaries, where Roman officers wrote casually of taking companions from defeated peoples. They spoke not of love, but of ownership. In one unearthed scroll from Vindolanda, a soldier refers to a local woman as mine by right of Rome. The arrogance in those words captures everything the empire stood for. Domination masquerading as order. Imagine living in those provinces, Gaul, Britannia, Numidia, where the Roman flag flew above you, where Latin replaced your native tongue, and where your mother or grandmother bore the legacy of Rome's conquest in silence. Entire generations were born from violence, and those descendants grew up both Roman and not. They inherited the culture of their captors, but carried the trauma of the conquered. Rome called this civilization. But for many, it was identity built from ashes. Still, there were those who resisted, not with swords, but with memory. Among the Celtic tribes, oral tradition preserved stories of Roman cruelty long after their lands were annexed. Some spoke of queens who defied Rome and suffered for it. Boudica, queen of the Iceni, was one. When Roman soldiers flogged her and violated her daughters, she rose in rebellion. Her army burned Roman towns, slaughtered legions, and for a moment, the empire trembled. But Rome's vengeance was absolute. Her defeat was inevitable, yet her name endured. To this day, she stands not as a symbol of defeat, but of resistance. Her story, unlike those of countless others, survived because it burned too brightly to be erased. But think of how many Boudicas were lost. Women whose fury never reached the page, whose defiance died in silence. Their blood paved Rome's roads. Their tears washed its marble. Their bodies built its glory. The empire that called itself eternal was fed by their suffering, and in the end, that hunger consumed itself. Because what Rome never understood was that cruelty cannot sustain greatness. You can build monuments from bones, but time always remembers the ghosts beneath them. As Christianity rose and the empire fractured, the narrative began to shift. The church condemned the old ways, preaching compassion and virtue. But even in this new moral order, the stories of the conquered wives remained untold. The victors of history wrote only of redemption, not accountability. The same empire that once enslaved now sought forgiveness without confession. Monks copied texts about emperors, generals, and saints, but the names of the nameless women were left to dust. Rome repented in words, but not in truth, and yet their shadows linger. Archaeologists still find traces of them. Ivory combs carved with foreign motifs, burial shrouds embroidered in Eastern styles, bracelets that once belonged to royal captives. Each discovery whispers the same story. They were here. They lived. They endured. In Pompeii, before the city was buried in ash, graffiti scratched on a wall reads, "Venit ex oriente pulchra serva." A beautiful slave came from the east. A simple line, but haunting. Who was she? A queen turned captive? A girl taken in war? The volcano froze her world in time, but not her name. She remains, like thousands of others, faceless and eternal. Even Rome's greatest historians, men like Tacitus and Livy, could not escape the weight of what they witnessed. Buried in their writing are moments of guilt, fleeting admissions that behind Rome's order lay chaos, behind its law lay injustice. Tacitus once wrote that the Romans make a desert and call it peace. Those words, perhaps unintentionally, reveal everything. Peace in the Roman world was not the absence of war. It was the silence of the conquered. And perhaps that is why their story still matters today. Because Rome's darkness did not die with it. The idea that power justifies cruelty, that domination equals order, still echoes in our own time. Empires change their names. They call themselves nations, alliances, corporations, but the pattern remains. The same pride, the same blindness, the same erasure. When one people triumph over another, it is the women who bear the weight first, and the memory last. History repeats itself because we refuse to listen to those it silenced. Imagine standing in the ruins of the Roman Forum today. Tourists take photos. Children laugh. The sun spills over columns that have stood for 2,000 years. You walk through arches built to celebrate victory. Titus, Severus, Constantine, each stone carved with the spoils of war. Chariots, armor, gold. But what you don't see are the women who once walked beneath those arches in chains. The ground beneath your feet remembers their footsteps. The wind that whistles through the ruins carries their whispers. And if you listen closely, beyond the hum of modern Rome, you can almost hear it, the sound of their silence, speaking still. The tragedy of Rome's darkest secret is not only what it did, but how easily we forgot. How history praised its glory while ignoring its grief. How conquest was celebrated and suffering erased. Yet truth, like Rome itself, cannot stay buried forever. Every civilization that rises on the pain of others eventually faces its reckoning. The empire that believed itself immortal fell, as all empires do, to time and consequence. And in that fall, perhaps there is justice. Not for the emperors, not for the generals, but for the nameless. Because even though Rome tried to erase them, we can still choose to remember, to speak their stories, to give them the dignity denied to them in life. Their pain may have been worse than death, but their memory, fragile, flickering, and fierce, survived the empire that sought to destroy it. Rome's legacy is carved into stone, its glory, its conquests, its emperors immortalized in marble. But beneath that cold perfection lies what history refused to tell. The stolen lives that built it. The silenced women whose suffering outlasted the empire itself. For every triumph Rome celebrated, 1,000 cries went unheard. Their pain was not an accident of history. It was the price of power, hidden beneath beauty, masked by civilization. And as centuries passed, their silence became the foundation of Rome's myth. But history is not marble. It breathes, it cracks, and sometimes it whispers back. Those nameless women, the wives, daughters, and queens who endured what Rome called victory, still speak through ruins, through relics, through memory. Their stories remind us that no empire, however great, can outlast the truth. If this story moved you, subscribe for more hidden histories and dark truths long buried by time. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an episode, and let us know in the comments, what empire or era should we uncover next? Until then, stay curious, stay awake, and remember, behind every monument of glory lies a shadow that history tried to forget.